Welcome to Surrender School. Mission statement. At Surrender School, we recover. Our mission is to share 12-step and other supportive recovery solutions with those who want a healthy relationship with food. We are not an official 12-step meeting, but we do try to adhere to the spirit of the traditions. If Surrender School has helped your recovery, please consider donating. There's a yellow donate button at the bottom of the landing page for our website. All right, let's get into it. Let's take a moment, go ahead and take a couple of deep breaths. Bring yourself back into the room, back into the day. Feel your feet on the floor, get grounded, feel present. God, help us to set aside everything we think we know to leave space for what we have yet to learn. Okay, so today about emotional sobriety, and I'm going to be talking about it in general, like the general concept of emotional sobriety. I will tell you, I had not heard of emotional sobriety until probably 3 years ago. I had never, and I know I had read the term, but let's go ahead and dive in. So emotional sobriety is all the buzz right now in 12-step circles, and for good reason. Emotional drunkenness for me is a first-class ticket to Bingeville. And I think probably for most of us, emotional drunkenness often leads to food. Emotional turmoil was really what I was using food to get away from. So the emotional drunkenness was just part and parcel of my whole addiction process. In the AA 12 and 12 on page 106, Bill says, and before 2 or 3 years ago, this was the only place I had ever seen emotional sobriety. He says, here we begin to practice all 12 steps of the program in our daily lives so that we and those about us may find emotional sobriety. Now, that was in 1951 when Bill wrote the AA 12 and 12. About 7 years later, in 1958, Bill elaborated on this emotional sobriety concept in a Grapevine article titled "The Next Frontier: Emotional Sobriety." He truly thought that this was going to be the next big wave in addiction recovery, was emotional sobriety. Took a lot longer, I think, for us to get there than he thought, but that's what he thought. That was going to be the next big, important wave. So the central theme of this 1958 article is about the corrosive effect of emotional dependency. That's the phrase he used, emotional dependency. He said, quote, "My basic flaw had always been dependence. Absolute dependence on people or circumstances to supply me with prestige, security, and the like," unquote. So he goes on to say further, quote, "For my dependency meant demand, a demand for the possession and control of the people and the conditions surrounding me." Okay, so this is really, really important stuff. So I want to unpack it just a little bit. The first quote, and I'm going to repeat it. The first quote says, "My basic flaw had always been dependence, almost absolute dependence on people or circumstances to supply me with prestige, security, and the like." I believe this sentence is talking about being dependent on others for how we feel about ourselves. Essentially, being dependent on others for our self-esteem and our emotional stability. And the way that I guess the way that I really look at it is my sense of okayness in myself, my sense of being okay. I am dependent on others for my sense of being okay. Alan Berger wrote the emotional sobriety book that we were referencing before. Alan Berger believes that emotional dependency is making our emotional security dependent on people and situations outside ourselves. And ultimately, what this means is that we are at the mercy of other people's moods and whims for how we feel about ourselves. We are at their mercy in order to get our needs met. We are at the mercy of other people to meet our needs. What if they're in a bad mood? What if their spouse just gave them, divorce papers? What if, they got yelled at work? I mean, relying on other people to make us okay is a very vulnerable position to be in. And let's face it, humans are fallible. I mean, they are not going to be able to come through for us all the time. Okay, so when they won't give us what we need to feel good about ourselves, then we suffer. But do we suffer without letting them know? No, we don't. Sometimes we suffer in silence by sulking and pouting, and sometimes by railing against the injustice of all of it. How dare they let me have demands? I let them know what my demands are. Why aren't they meeting? When I was a paralegal, that was my third career. When I was a paralegal, part of my job was to train the baby lawyers, the lawyers fresh out of law school. So we spent quite a bit of time together. And I think as a result, they trusted me. So they would come to me, sometimes in tears, to complain about how mean and cold the older attorneys were to them. And I always told them the same truth, and that is, employment is nothing more than a contract between employer and employee. They give you money, and in return, you give them your time and your talent. Nowhere in this contract does it say that your emotional and social needs are going to be met. Look elsewhere to get those needs met, not at work. I had that spiel. I could have done that spiel in my sleep. I said it so much. Now, I tell you this story to illustrate an important point about emotional sobriety. We are not the center of the universe. And the people in our lives are not here to meet all of our needs. And I know that sounds nasty and I know that sounds mean, but it is the truth. It is the truth. They are not here to take care of us. Realizing this and acting accordingly has been a huge part of my emotional maturation in program. That other people are not here to meet my needs. And I need to learn how to meet my needs with my higher power's help. That was huge for me. So if we are not emotionally sober, how do we react when our dependency needs aren't met? That's the second quote from Bill. Quote, "For my dependency meant demand, a demand for the possession and control of the people and conditions surrounding me," unquote. When people don't do what we want them to do, we demand it in some shape or form. And to me, this is so beautifully written about in pages 60 through 64 in the big book, just all the ways we try and wrest satisfaction out of life. We try and make people do what we want them to do. But in essence, okay, and I don't like this, but I'm going to say it anyway. In essence, our demands boil down to us using control, manipulation, guilt, threats, and the silent treatment as a means to force people to give us what we want. And of course, this almost always turns out badly, usually with me binging my brains out. The binging works to stuff down my negative emotions for a bit, but binging does nothing to meet the original needs I was trying to get others to meet in the first place. I still haven't met my own needs. Binging sort of short circuits that whole process of me meeting my own needs. Damn it. So what does Bill say we should do about this conundrum? Here's his answer. It's really interesting. I can't wait to hear some of the shares tonight to see what you think about this. Here's his answer. Quote, offer love to others regardless of the return, unquote. He calls this a healing circuit. Quote, this is Bill talking. This seems to be the primary healing circuit, an outgoing love of God's creation and his people, by means of which we avail ourselves of his love for us. Close quote. So what I think he is saying is that by giving love unconditionally, we become open to receiving the unconditional love of our higher powers. I'm going to say that again. And this is me thinking, so, grain of salt. When we give love unconditionally, we open ourselves up to receiving the unconditional love of our higher powers. And that's the healing circuit. We give love out and love comes back to us, not from the people that we're giving love to. And that may happen, and that's cool, but that's not the healing circuit. The healing circuit is you pour out love from yourself and love comes back to you through your higher power. Okay. This attitude frees us from making unreasonable and unreasonable people around us because we are not expecting through this healing circuit for other people to meet our needs. We give up the notion that other people in our lives are here solely to meet our needs or meet our demands. And for me, this was a huge paradigm shift. Although I think there's very few of us that will admit that this dynamic goes on for us, that we're doing this, because I'll tell you how I fooled myself into believing I wasn't engaging in this. And this is what I told myself to help me pull the wool over my own eyes. I'm being nice. I'm being helpful. I'm being generous by doing X, Y, and Z for you, with you, whatever, so that then I get back what I want. That's the real truth, is I did this to get what I wanted, to try and control my environment to get my needs met and to get what I wanted. But I deluded myself by telling myself I was being helpful and loving and generous and kind and all of those wonderful things that I told myself. But really what I was doing is it was just another form of control and manipulation to get what I wanted. So that was a huge paradigm shift for me. If you look honestly at any of the conflict or hurt feelings in your life, you will find this emotional dependency at the core of it. Step 4 and 5 are great at uncovering this dynamic. At our center, we are angry or afraid because people, institutions, or situations didn't do what we wanted them to. Now, this is about the time when my sponsees say things like this. Yeah, Linda. Okay, I can see that in certain circumstances, but aren't parents supposed to be supportive of their children? But aren't children supposed to do what their parents say? But aren't spouses supposed to support each other and be there for each other? Sure, people are supposed to do all kinds of crap, but they don't, right? They don't. And when we are dependent on people to do what they're supposed to do in order to be okay, you have backed yourself into a dependency corner. And you will be unhappy because people don't do what they're supposed to do a lot. Bill puts it like this, quote, "If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root of it some unhealthy dependency and its consequent unhealthy demand, expectation. Emotional dependencies lead to demands, or another word is expectations. And we all know that expectations are premeditated resentments. It's a lovely little cycle we do. So let me start that over because I interrupted myself in the middle of it. If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we find at the root of it some unhealthy dependency and its consequent unhealthy demand. Let us, with God's help, continually surrender these hobbling demands," unquote. All right, let's do a question. Let's see here. Okay. I'll put up 5 minutes for this. Here's the question. Has emotional drunkenness played a part in your relapse, overeating, or binging? In what ways? How does that process usually play out? And I'll start the timer.
Thanks for recovering with us.